Okay, so thank you for all coming to this panel discussion, which I think is going to be really an interesting one. We've got a real diverse range of farmers and people from the farming industry here. I'd like to kick off by asking the panellists to introduce themselves.
So I'm John Atkinson. I'm the chair of the Rare Breed Survival Trust, and I'm also a farmer in the Lake District, and we do quite a bit with wool.
So I'm Maria Benjamin. I'm John's other half, so I live on the farm as well in the Lake District. I help a little bit with the farming, but my main role is farm diversification. So we heard earlier about farmers not really making any money at farming. So my job was to try and bring in income to make the farm sustainable.
My name's Tom Davis. I'm probably the closest farmer to where we are now. I manage a farm on the Isle of Dogs called Mudshoot Park and Farm, which sees 250,000 people a year, 45,000 school-aged children, and is London's only rare breeds approved conservation centre. Not from a farming background, born and raised on a council estate in southwest London in Battersea. Visited my local city farm and decided that that's what I wanted to do, and apparently I can talk a bit of sense about some sheep and farming.
We'll soon find out.
Frank Languish. I'm a farmer from the western end of Romney Marsh, near Rye in East Sussex. We keep quite a few sheep. We produce between 20 and 30 tonnes of wool a year. And also I'm involved in a project at the moment to reduce the micron on Romney wool.
Good afternoon all, I'm Nicola Noble, I'm Project Manager at National Sheep Association. We're a membership organisation for UK sheep farmers, trying to instil best practice with them, but also to try and educate those that aren't involved in the sector on all the good things that sheep farming does for the environment, ecosystem services and public good delivery.
I didn't introduce myself, sorry. I'm from British Wool, so I'm the marketing director. My name's Graham Clark from British Wool, so yeah, a bit remiss of me. So as you can see, we've got a broad panel, so I'd like to kick off by asking Frank, really, because I know, Frank, you spent a lot of time in the Southern Hemisphere. What are the main differences between farms in the UK and farms in the Southern Hemisphere?
Well, the big difference is in the British Isles that we have so many different breeds of sheep. Which none of the other countries do. In fact, most of the sheep that originated in the Southern Hemisphere, or in fact all of the sheep, came from either from here or from Europe originally. So the most numerate breed in the world, of course, is the Merino, which everybody knows about because it produces lovely fine wool. And the second most numerate breed in the world is the Romney. And both of those breeds are found extensively across the whole world. So they don't really have too many hill and mountain breeds in the Southern Hemisphere, but the scale of the farming is very, very different on the whole. The average flock size here in the UK is less than 250 ewes. You get into the Southern Hemisphere, and probably the smallest size is about 2,500. So very, very different way they're managed, but the outcome is mostly the same. The big driver for most sheep production is meat, but of course in parts of Europe there's also a lot of sheep are kept for producing milk and for cheese. So there's a huge diversity, but in the UK we're mostly meat producing sheep with a sideline of wool.
And I think leading nicely on to that, a question for John. Why do we have such a big mix of sheep breeds and wool qualities in the UK?
Yes, in the UK, unlike in a lot of other countries, got a very diverse ecology and geology. So when people didn't move around as much, different breeds sort of were suited to that area. So, if you had a farm that was really dry and didn't grow much grass, you wanted a sheep that put lots of fat on so it could survive through the dry periods. And if you had a mountain that you wanted to graze, you wanted something with really coarse wool that kept the rain out. So because we've been farming sheep in here since God was a lad, the sheep have sort of designed to fit in that local area. Whereas when they were exported out to the new colonies, as they were called in those days, they took the sheep that would suit that sort of climate and a lot less rain, bigger areas so they could just wander around and do what they want. And obviously, originally, it was just for wool. You know, that's the whole reason why they're kept. So they took the wool breeds, you know, top and bottom of it. The big thing about the UK is, because we've got different breeds, is that sort of unique provenance could be used much better than it is now. Like we've been talking to the wool board for the last few years, it's saying, you know, sell the wool as breed specific rather than a certain grade, because certain manufacturers, certain designers want that sort of unique selling point that, you know, I want some Ryland wool, and then I can say that, you know, this is made out of pure Ryland wool, because it's different to anywhere else in the world. We're never going to compete with merino, you know, because it's available everywhere. It comes as a product that's roughly the same every time. So let's use the uniqueness of all these different breeds to be a major selling point.
And I think if you look next door on the grading station, you can see exactly the diversity that we do have in the UK. And I'd urge you all to have a look at that if you haven't done already, and ask our grader Colin questions about the different types of wool and also what end products are going to, because it's really, really diverse. So next question really is for Nicola from the NSA. So how do farmers manage land, animal welfare and the environment as part of wool production? And how is the government encouraging this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure from the government in terms of environmental land management. So farmers are now being asked to deliver a lot more than just food production and fibre, and they're actually being asked to deliver environmental benefits. So things like sustainable farming incentive in England, and the sustainable farming scheme in Wales, and obviously other schemes in Scotland and Northern Ireland are all being pushed from a government level on farmers to try and embrace that environmental positivity. So lots of farmers have already been doing this for years. Things like countryside stewardship, higher tier and mid-tier have already been delivering for the environment, providing biodiversity, providing habitats, hedgerows, other spaces for other animals and other species to flourish. But now there is a big push coming on that side of it from the government. I think it's also worth saying that in the UK we work to some of the highest animal health and welfare standards, and we're globally recognised for that level of achievement. So having to, if someone suggested having another accreditation scheme on top of that, perhaps specifically for wool, there's probably not a need for it, because farmers are already working to those high health and welfare standards that are globally recognised. And alongside that, there's also a lot of red tape in terms of just keeping the sheep themselves, so movement records, animal health records. There's so many, not necessarily tick boxes, but so many things that farmers have to do just legally to keep sheep in the first place, and then move them around the country and sell them and have a business, that there wouldn't need to be another accreditation scheme, because we're already working to such high health and welfare standards.
And I think that's really key for brands to understand. You know, you can ask for this, that, other legislation. It's understanding that farming in the UK is very different to farming in the Southern Hemisphere, and the standards that we're working to are also very different as well. So I think it's not to be closed-minded about that and say we need this, that, the other standard. Is to have that conversation with us so we can give you the answers. You know, the farmers in the UK do it to really, really high standards, and I think it's something we should be proud of and something we should be shouting about. So Maria, from a diversification point of view, could you talk us through what you've done?
Yeah, so I actually come from an art background. I did my master's at Goldsmiths, and then met a farmer. And but I think I don't feel like I lost that creativity. It was just used in a different way. So I looked at how to make the farm more profitable with what we had. So rather than intensifying and increasing livestock numbers, I looked at how we could make the most of what they produced. And one of those things was obviously the wool, because at that point John was just sending it off and not seeing it again, which actually a lot of farmers do. They're only at the very beginning of a product, so they're at the raw material end, either producing meat that might end up in a supermarket, might end up in a restaurant, but they don't know. And actually being in control of that process of taking a raw material from the farm and making something from it, say like this gilet, was really nice. Like John can now wear his own flock, and I think that's really important for farmers to then, it's a kind of respect for themselves and what they're doing, actually being in touch with what they're producing. So they can feel really proud of that. And we work with, so we're not just doing stuff with our own wool, we work with a lot of different farmers, at least 20 farmers in the Lake District and other farmers around the UK, helping them process wool, making more of what they actually produce and paying them a better price. And that I think that really came about just by thinking creatively, which farmers naturally do anyway. But I think having that, what you learn from art school is, because I don't even know how to knit, that even if you don't know something, you just have a go and do it anyway. And you don't worry so much about failing, because you just pivot and do something else. And that's kind of, I think that's why it's been fairly straightforward for me in terms of diversifying, whereas a lot of farmers maybe struggle with it because they've been pushed down that route of specialising, which I think we're seeing more and more actually as an issue. And actually, nature works best as a diversification because it's more resilient, and so do businesses. And I think that diversification in terms of the wool that we produce in the UK, all these different breeds, so breeds being very suitable to an actual landscape and habitat, not only is that like more natural, it's better for the animal welfare, because if you've got a sheep that, like a merino, would not survive on the fell, so why would you make them struggle on a fell? You want a hill breed that can deal with the weather. So all these sort of points of interest for me were so valuable in setting up the business and making the decisions that we made. So it's not just about that we've got all these breeds and we should do something with them. It's like, actually, it's really important for the welfare of the sheep.
Great, thank you. No, it's great. It's a totally different question for Tom. Not an easy question. Do you think the public understand and appreciate farming?
I think we're in a very sort of transitional period at this present moment in time, and I can speak from my experience of running an open farm, and like I say, seeing 250,000 visitors a year, 45,500 school-aged children. Now, the children don't have the problem. We are a working farm. We do send animals for meat and into, we're hoping to have a farm shop in the new year on site. But people are disconnected. We live in a day and age where people can go and buy anything they want to eat or drink 24 hours a day. Now, people will say to me, Tom, I can't believe that you send your lambs for meat because, you know, I'm trying to save the planet, I don't eat meat. Yeah, they eat avocados. And I say to them, well, do you have fruit berries, soft berries and soft fruit on your overnight oats in the morning? Well, you shouldn't be having those in December and in the months that it can't be grown here. So if you truly are concerned about saving the planet, then you need to have a look at the bigger picture and stop looking at it through the keyhole. Open the door and have a bigger look at it. And I think now, for farmers to tell that story, whether it be about meat, whether it be about wool, and we need to celebrate farmers, and we need to celebrate farming in the UK, and alongside that as well, we need to celebrate the breeds that hail from here, you know, and looking after the rare breeds. It's part of our agricultural history and heritage, and they're not living museum pieces. They are animals that, managed in the right way, in the right system, will do you a good return. And if you can do that well, then you're on to a winner. And it's like what was being said earlier on, you need to have that story, and brands and people want that USP, want that story. And there's not many restaurants around here, I would imagine, that you could go into and just order steak and chips. It's a 28-day aged, grass-fed Aberdeen Angus with triple cooked chips, okay? So why shouldn't it be Hebridean or Manx Lockton wool? Why shouldn't it be grey-faced Dartmoor wool? And why shouldn't it be, you know, Wensleydale Hogget? All these sorts of things buy into society and the way that it's going. They want provenance, they want story, they want USPs. So it's about joining the dots. And having a farm that's open in the middle of London, you've got the whole nation pretty much comes to London at some point in their life, and a lot of people come to the farm, but there's no buy-in from big agricultural organisations. the NFU, AHDB, have never ever approached. There's 11 farms in London, you know, and we're there bridging the gap between the town and the countryside. We've got the capital at our fingertips, you know, spreading that message. So I think it's key that, you know, like I was saying earlier on in one of the questions that we had in the previous thing, people need to support farmers. Brands need to not be afraid that farming does mean sometimes we eat animals, but you need to celebrate that, support that, and stand by that. And then once the farmers have your trust and understanding, then they may then go, well, actually, I'm going to reduce the number of meat sheep that I keep and start looking at dual-purpose breeds to produce wool and meat too. But they're not going to take a blind leap of faith at this present moment in time. So, you know, that's where we are.
Do you think the best way to communicate with those consumers is by having them on farm, or do you think there's other ways we could be doing that?
Well, it's honesty. We have people come to me all the time, and generally the first question that people will ask me when they visit the farm is, do you send your animals for meat? The answer is yes. Worst thing you can do is hide that. Because if you hide that, then it shows that you're not trustworthy. I give people the answer, and I say to them, we send a few of, because we don't produce vast numbers, we send a few of our animals that don't make the sort of pedigree breeding grade into the meat trade and industry, you know, and from that then they can make their own educated decision. It's not like I'm selling them, saying to them, you know, we're sending them off to a nice farm in the countryside to live out the rest of their lives. I'm honest and I'm truthful, and then what people decide to do with that is up to them. You know, and because they haven't paid to get in, if they tell me they're not coming back, I don't miss an entry fee.
And on the same kind of thing, Maria, how do you think we can improve farmer to fashion storytelling?
Well, that was the word there, storytelling, and it's authentic storytelling. I think we've gotten really used to kind of fictional storytelling where the marketing is very disconnected to the actual product. It's just a made-up story. Whereas it'd be really nice to get back to non-fiction. So it's something authentic. And you see it a lot with brands, and it's you know, it's like I saw one recently, and it was using merino wool. It was a company that only uses merino, doesn't use any British wool, but they used a British actor on a British farm, so kind of all the references were there, so if you just glanced at it, you would presume British wool. So it's all that deception, it's horrible. And you see it all the time with the, like even naming yarns after British sheep breed when it's merino, or calling something Shetland soft, which means merino, or saying Scottish lamb's wool, which is merino. You know, and people don't read that as fake. You know, they're not, and they're beginning to now with food. So they'll know if they buy a Tesco chicken that says the name of a farm on it, they know that it's probably not from that farm. That's just a marketing thing. But they're not so used to it in fashion. And I think I would love to see more people call. And I do online. I call out companies that kind of can't try and pull these fast ones. But I just want to see more authenticity. And I think customers do, because they've forgotten that relationship. And I've talked about that before with fast fashion. It's very much like a one-night stand, and that you just don't care. You know, a piece gets wrecked, you chuck it in the bin. You don't think about saving it. Whereas if it's an actual relationship and there's a story and you know about it, you have an emotional attachment to a piece, then you care for it. You care about how it's washed. You darn it if it gets a little bit worn. And we've kind of gotten used to that, everything being disposable, and it makes such a difference when it isn't. And I know from our customers that buy from us, we get so many nice emails from people saying how much they love a product that they've bought, and they tell me about it. Which you just would never normally do if you pop out to Uniqlo and buy something. You know, you don't write to them and say, I love that top, you know, because it means nothing to you. And I think when you have that experience again, you remember, oh yeah, and actually it changes how you care, not just about that one garment, but about yourself as well. You just kind of, you know, it just changes something in you.
And I guess traceability is the key to that, isn't it?
Traceability, it's just a story. I think in the last talk she was talking about, oh yeah, it all starts with the yarn. But it doesn't actually. It starts with the soil, and it starts with really healthy soil. That's where it starts, and a farmer is responsible for that soil, and he needs to make sure that he is looking after that land, because it is not just a commodity. That land is something that is part of, like John's 6th generation on his farm. So he's thinking about, when he makes a decision, he's thinking about his ancestors, but also the generations that will come after him. He has to take care of it. He can't squander it. And that's really important. So having that longevity within our countryside as well is really important, that land isn't just taken away from farming and rewild or whatever because someone has a fancy notion to do that now. I think it is really important that that's our cultural heritage. These people have looked after our land for generations and generations, and I would hate to see that stop. And I'm not from that background, so it's not about me wanting this for myself, but I can see that it's part of our legacy. As much as we see in the British Library or the British Museum, the landscape is the same. It's just a working landscape.
Different change of topic slightly. So climate change is obviously a massive issue for farmers, not just in the UK, but across the globe. Frank, could you tell us how climate change and the weather can affect the quality and the end product of the wool?
I'm probably not going to give you the right answer here, because I'm not exactly a climate change denier, but the weather has been different. And I'm old enough to have remembered the winter of 62, 63, when we actually had to dig a lot of the sheep out of the snow, and some of them were actually buried for over a month, and they still came out alive, luckily. I've seen the great storm of 87 when we lost all our trees and a lot of roofs. And I've seen particularly wet winters recently. I've also seen some hot summers. The hot summers in the 70s were quite something to be seen, and it's more the fact that the meteorologists wind things up more today than they did in the old days. Farming is always a challenge with the weather. That is the biggest test that we face. But actually sheep survive very well normally under dry conditions. The merino especially, the drier the conditions, the less food that it gets, the finer the wool. So if you see these very, very fine 12 micron wools, they will be from sheep that have been on a very low plane of nutrition. Our sheep, we don't sort of think too much about that for the wool. It's because we like to feed them as well as possible so they can survive very well. The Romney especially is quite a low micron wool. It also has a very white wool, and colour is extremely important, as a lot of you probably know. If you want to change the colour, if you want to dye wool, then you need to have it as light or as white as possible, so you can dye it pastel colours. So yes, weather does make a difference, and we do need grass to make sheep grow. Our sheep only ever eat grass or forage. They're never housed. They don't eat any grain. They just eat grass.
So it can affect the colour, can't it, in terms of... It can affect the colour, that's a big thing, isn't
yes,
it? It goes yellow.
If you do get a wet summer, like we had not this summer gone, the year before, when we had a very, very wet year, it did, unfortunately, make the wool yellower, and that reduces the value of the wool quite significantly.
So, sorry, Nicola.
Can I say something? So, you will probably know, but wool is 50% carbon roughly, and that carbon is taken in by the sheep from the air through grass, churned into wool. And if you make a product out of British wool, it'll probably last 100 years, and then within 2 years it's back in the ground as carbon again. So it is a really, really green product. Whereas oil that makes synthetics is the complete opposite. You know, as you said earlier, you don't know how long it's going to last. Nobody knows yet because it's the first one's still there. So, you know, it may be slightly more expensive, but if you're looking at being green, then, you can't get anything greener.
Yeah, it was just to build on that point in that if you look at all the agricultural systems, sheep farming is probably the most, if we're going to use the word sustainable, the most sustainable. They're outdoor, they're extensive, they graze off the grass that's grown through the soil health, producing that forage, and they turn a non-edible human protein into an edible human protein that we can eat, alongside producing that high-quality fibre as well, that's grown on the back of a sheep, has to be shorn every year for welfare. So again, you're not having an impact on the sheep by removing the fleece. We have to do that every year for their animal welfare. And then it grows again naturally. And obviously, John's picked up on the carbon point that you can't get a better system than that. And if that means that perhaps the weather's bad and the sheep are out and the fleece gets a bit yellow, can we embrace that? And again, use that, celebrate that story of how natural sheep farming is and utilise that within our brands and say, yes, the colour might be a bit yellow, but that's because of the weather and that's because the sheep are out there all year round and that's just what it is. Can we embrace it? Can we celebrate it rather than turn it down as a product?
So that leads sort of nicely on to regenerative farming is sort of a term that's come in the last, 5 to 10 years, and it's used extensively and it's possibly used wrong in some situations. I'd like to open this up to the whole panel in terms of what do you think regenerative farming is, and also what do you think sustainable farming is?
Shall I start?
I knew that we'd get them.
As a farmer all my life, I do struggle to understand what regenerative farming means, because it's what we've always done. There's a very old saying amongst farming communities that you want to live as if you're going to die tomorrow, but farm as if you'll live forever. And so that means that you always make sure that you look after the land, the livestock, so everything is there for the next generation, which is why it's rather galling to have politicians that think that perhaps that shouldn't be the case anymore.
I'll say it a little bit less aggressively, but it's basically going back to what our grandfathers did. So after the Second World War, there was a massive push to produce more food to feed the nation because we weren't importing it from everywhere else. So shortcuts were made. There was less people about, so the old ways of moving animals all the time, of mending the hedges and all that sort of thing went out of fashion because there just wasn't the labour to do it. So everything got mechanised, farms got bigger and bigger, less and less people. And so I always say everybody that comes on your farm is trying to sell you something, and farmers are very good at looking for props, so they're not the most sort of stable people, so they think, oh well, this fella's coming, he's going to sell me this magic potion that's going to make everything easier for me, so I'll buy that. And so people have become reliant on lots of inputs, and probably too much. And so turning the clock back a bit to when Frank was born, about 1900, and thinking, well, actually, do I need this? Do I really want it? And the other thing that's happened is because people have less labour about, sheep and cattle tend to be set stock, so they'll be put in a field for the whole summer or the whole year, and so the grass is kept short all the time. It doesn't go through its natural life cycle, so it tends to be not as fibrous, and it's also you're more likely to get worms and things because the animals are eating close to the ground. So letting that grass grow a bit longer and moving the animals more often, which I'm sure Frank does, because otherwise they'll float away, that's in effect going back to more regenerative farming. So you're not farming the animals, you're farming the soil and the grass that the animals are produced on. So you're looking at the raw product rather than the output, is my simplest way of saying it.
Just to add on to that as well, is look at the breeds that are being championed for this. They're all natives. Belted Galloways, traditional Angus, Herefords, the Herdwicks, and all of these breeds. You put those breeds that were formulated and created in this varied country and island into the right system, extensively, with low inputs, they'll do you a hell of a job. And it's just going back to what we had originally. You wouldn't be able to farm a pedigree Limousin cow the same way as you farm a Belty. It's completely different animals for completely different systems. And it's going back, not only in our minds and with the way of our thinking, but also using the animals. And that's where when I talk to people that visit the farm, I say that what we're doing here is conserving breeds of the past for generations of the future, because it's very cyclical and it's gone round again and round again. So just look at the breeds that are being championed for this regenerative farming push. They're all natives. Natives do better than most things in it. And that's one of the things to celebrate, because that also then ties in with the storytelling, the provenance, the USP, because you can give that product a name, an additional name from the animal it came from.
Yeah, I think for me it's regenerative is basically just saying, how does nature do it best? And it's looking at how nature does it as your kind of guide. And that's not just in farming, that's in business as well. So if you think about a lot of traditional extractive businesses, that isn't how nature works. Nature works best as low input, complex and diverse, and not about endless growth, because everything in nature grows to a certain point, then stops, but it's still a useful part of an ecosystem. It can become food and shelter. A tree can become food and shelter for lots and lots of different species. And really, we have to think about our own businesses like that, and not just about, say, your farm is necessarily about getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's about what you can do to make yourself sustainable and not negatively impact the landscape, but to improve the landscape.
It was just to add a tale of caution in that I think the word regenerative has been sort of banned, like people are jumping on the bandwagon with the term regenerative, and it doesn't always mean what it says on the tin. So regenerative is 5 principles. They're not certified, they're just really 5 positive principles about working with the environment, things like improving soil health, not leaving ground bare over winter, so that again, that protects the soil, integrating mixed livestock species, and then there's another 2 I can't remember, sorry, off the top of my head. But it is all about, I think, farmers getting on that journey. Loads of farmers, as the panel said, have been doing it for years, been doing it for hundreds of years, and it's just bringing back traditional practices that do help benefit soil health, which in time then helps your business. So I think if people can look at responsible use of resources, reducing unnatural resources like fertilizer inputs, and perhaps using nitrogen fixing species in the soil. But I'd say for any farmers that do say they're regenerative, generally they're looking at being better for the environment and trying to work better with nature. So but also be careful with what you pick up on. If it does say regenerative, it's not a certified scheme. So
just as quickly to say to that as well is it doesn't matter where you are in the country to practice those principles. I'll give you, for example, I provided some sheep to graze a wildflower meadow between the Ritz Hotel and Buckingham Palace in Green Park. And that happened for a number of years. And then what happened is it was monitored by working in conjunction with Mission Invertebrate. And we grazed it for a period of time, I think it was about a month. And halfway through that, they came in and did a survey of dung beetles. And there were 7 different species of dung beetles found in that tiny little meadow 200 yards from Buckingham Palace's front gate. And that shows you that if you use the right methods and the right animals in the right system, you will improve everything about it. So it is just about what you're doing and how you're doing it, the tools that are in your armoury, as opposed to having to be out in the middle of the sticks to practice those sort of methods, and they are.
Okay, so I think we are running a little bit behind schedule, so we've probably got 5 or 10 minutes for any questions, if anybody's got any questions in the audience they'd like the panel to answer.
So we hear like a lot of horror stories in the fashion industry, for instance, like Laura Piana exploiting vicuna herders in Peru, and a lot of stories of animals being exploited, but also farmers being exploited. And I guess I was wondering, from the standpoint of British wool, in addition to the laws that they have in the UK, how is stuff like that prevented?
Well, for me, I think it's having a really short supply network. So you know the people you're working with. That's the problem. Like when you've got a really long supply network, you can hide all of that and you can exploit and you don't see it at the other end. But because, I mean, you pick up the wool from every single farm that we work with, we see the farmers, they're exploiting themselves because they can't afford to exploit anyone else. They basically earn nothing. But do you know what I mean? They're not exploiting anyone because they can't hire people. But keeping that supply chain really short. So we do all of our manufacturing in the UK as well. So I can visit every single processor that we're working with. And that for me is really, really important, because you see far too much of that where these things are hidden, and on the surface it can look glossy and lovely, but it's not.
I think you have to remember that the majority of British sheep have a very, very high value, and anything that's worth a lot of money gets much better looked after than something that's worth very little, and that's one of the problems that happens in other parts of the world.
Yeah, and in the British Wool Board, we've got a cooperative that looks after every sheep farmer and sells their wool at the best value it possibly can. There are fly-by-nights that try and buy wool on the open market and are competing with British wool, but with British wool we know that we're going to get paid and we're getting as much as possible for our and they'll take, whether you've got 5 sheep or 500 sheep, they'll take the wool. So it is a very short supply chain and it's monitored all the way through. So I think that's, another reason why you should be using British wool, really.
Yeah, just 2 points on that, in that if an animal is a healthy animal, generally it's more productive and more efficient. So from a farming perspective, if you treat your animals well, treat them to high welfare, keep them healthy, they're going to naturally be more productive for you. So perhaps throw more lambs, look after their lambs better, have a better fleece quality. And just, on top of that as well, if you've got a healthier animal, it also is naturally more climate friendly. So there's shown studies where if you control parasites inside their gut, they produce less methane, therefore it's better for the planet. So there's lots of positives about making sure that. And then on the other side of it, I've mentioned quite a few times that we're obviously quite an extensive outdoor grazing system. You see sheep every day, everyone's out on walks. So you can't really hide bad animal welfare because they're out in the field and people will see it.
Any other questions?
So recently I was in the Lake District and going through a farm, and they'd said that they'd been limited in terms of how many sheep they were allowed to have on their farm. And then you get the conversation about where the sheep are, if they're in lowlands or if they're in highlands, and should we be supporting breeds that are up in the higher lands or in the Lake District more than sheep that are grown that are grazed on a field, for example, lower down. Does that question make sense?
Kind of, but I mean, it's different breeds, so you wouldn't put a blue-faced Leicester on the fell because it would die, You need a hill breed on the fell and you need other breeds on the lowland, and they do different jobs. So they're for different reasons, so you support all of them, I think.
I mean, if you have one, should we be supporting more than one, or is one better for an ecosystem than another? So,
not really, but again, because of government interference in how people farm, sheep farming became the easiest way to make money in livestock farming for quite a long while. So, and we used to get paid a payment for actually having a sheep. So it didn't matter what it looked like or how it produced, you got a payment. So people would breed them small and stack them high, so they got more payments. So there was slightly too many sheep in the hills, and then the government suddenly realised, it's wrecking the environment, so we'll take that payment away and pay in a different way, and we want to remove all the sheep from the fells, and now they've realised that actually that's not good. You need a sort of a sustainable level. So we're still going through that process, but farming is, Frank will tell you as well, so related to government changes in how they want to do things, and in farming everything's very slow. You can't sort of switch the tap off and on again, and as somebody said earlier, we're in public eye all the time, so farming's one of the industries that everybody sees every day. If you go out in the countryside you can watch what we're doing, so everything's sort of monitored constantly by people, but government has so much, and their policies have so much effect on farming, probably than most other industries.
I think, unfortunately, a lot of government policy is very siloed thinking. So they have one target in mind, perhaps net zero targets for emissions, and they think, let's just reduce livestock numbers, and that'll reach that one target. And they're not thinking about the knock-on effects, like John was saying, and Marie was saying, remove all the sheep from the hills is not a good idea, because we're losing all those public goods and other benefits that they're delivering within those ecosystem services. But unfortunately, sometimes government are blindsided by that. And you'd comment about the different sheep, the hills. Do we support the hills more than the lowlands? I think there is a need to support the hill farmers a lot more, because of payment schemes have changed, and they used to be very reliant on basic payment schemes, so a monetary value for farming in those areas, and they are changing, and we need to make sure we do support the hills a bit more so they can keep farming, because otherwise we'll lose the what's called the stratified sheep system. So you have sheep that live in the hills, sheep that live in the uplands, sheep that live in the lowlands, and they essentially move down the hill as they get older, or they're crossbred for different breeds that then are more suited for grazing and thriving in those different environments. So there is a need for support, I think, for all farming types, but perhaps essentially a little bit more needed in certain areas.
And I think that's the thing as well, is you need to have a look at, there's 68 native breeds of sheep in the UK. That's more indigenous sheep breeds than any other country in the entire world. And all of those breeds need conserving and supporting, because if we lose one of those breeds, we lose a piece of our agricultural history and heritage. Yet, if you was to turn around and say to someone that's commercially farming Texel mules or North Country mules, right, we need you to start keeping Manx Locktons, they'll say, well, I'm not keeping them rare breeds, they're rare for a reason. But it's changing the mindset and understanding that those different breeds are suited to different systems in different parts of the country. And it's using them to their advantage and not seeing them in the wrong place as a disadvantaged animal. You put them in the right system and in the right place and farm them in a way that they'll do their best, then they will do their best for you and produce you lamb and wool that you need to have. And if you say, well, really, which one is better, you don't really want to pitch them against each other, because what are you measuring them on? If you're measuring them on meat and wool production, a Wensleydale's going to beat a primitive sheep breed, hands down, but wouldn't do as well in a system where it is.
Move on.
So I was wondering what your thoughts are on the effects of inheritance tax that farmers are now having to pay on British wool and what that might mean.
And as I said, government has a massive effect, and like we've had successive governments that have absolutely hammered farming in more ways than one, and me and Frank are older, so we've seen the bad times and the even badder times, So one day it's going to get brighter, and we'll wait for that day and hope we're still here. But there's just a complete disconnect at the moment between the town and the country, and this sort of new tax just shows it. It's just a complete misunderstanding of how things work. Yeah, you can say one thing.
I guess it's like John's farm is very, very small, so I don't think you won't have to pay inheritance tax. But I think the upsetting thing for me is, I understand with big landowners it's maybe a way to hide money, and why shouldn't they pay tax? Everyone else has to. But it's because a lot of very small farmers like John, whose family have farmed there 600 years, they're not thinking of that land as money. It doesn't have that same feeling. It doesn't feel rich. That land is there to be worked and cared for. It's not seen as an asset. It's not a bank account. It's another way of thinking completely, and that's not why he's doing it. He's farming because it's part of the culture, and it's a part of the culture he wants to pass on to the next generation. It's not about hoarding wealth at all. The value is sort of separate to the... Anyway, I'll let you go.
Let a rich farmer talk.
Yeah.
All farmers, and especially all sheep farmers, are asset rich and cash poor. And so the problem is that the asset has become inflated in value. The earning capacity from land is between 0.5% and 1% of the value. So economically, it never stacks up. Unfortunately, people have bought land for an investment in the hope that it keeps rising in value. One of the things that has happened is that the value of land is actually at the moment falling. because of political pressure. But it doesn't help those of us that have relatively large areas of land. Much of it, especially in the livestock sector, is kept for nature and conservation. We farm over 600 acres of land, which is SSSI, Sites of Special Scientific Interest. And that's been created because of the way that it's been farmed for generations. So if you think that that could be worth £10,000 an acre, it doesn't take a mathematician to work out how much tax would be liable on that. But the worrying thing is that the earning capacity of that land is only a fraction. And so there would be no more investment, and in fact some of it would be sold off and be in a worse state. So I hope that answers your question in a nutshell.
Okay, well, we'll have to end it on that note, but I'd like to thank the panel for a really interesting discussion. Thank you for the questions, and thank you for attending. Thank you.